Hello Bandifans! Today I come to you with a different kind of custom figure. This time it's a restoration of not one, but two sets of Moto Crash and Coco Bandicoot figures, sparked by the lifelong passion of two friends. Anyway, I'll get into that later. Let's talk figures! Crash Bandicoot Rarest figures are considered rare and generally command high prices, but none are as rare as the Moto Crash and Coco Bandicoot Duo Pack that was released as an online exclusive with Series 2 in 1999. And because it wasn't released directly to retail stores, it has become very sought after. Finding these loose is very difficult, and carded, almost impossible. So how did I end up with two of them? Well, let's start with my set. It was always my dream to get them, and eventually I found someone willing to sell them to me, and I probably paid way more than I should have, but I was just so excited. However, when they arrived, they were less than perfect, and I discovered the seller had lied about the condition. They were covered in plasticine and bits of paint, but worst of all, Crash's leg had totally snapped off. Coco had fallen apart, and they stank of smoke. After wrapping them both in dryer sheets for about 2 weeks, the smell eventually came out and I began working on restoring them. I cleaned them both off and removed the plasticine and paint that was stuck to them, and luckily I already had a fix in mind for Crash's leg. The joint was snapped in half, but still inside both the leg and the pelvis of the figure, so all I had to do was reconnect that joint. I took a needle vise and drilled into the leg, and then the pelvis. I then cut a small screw in half, wedged it in between both pieces with a bit of glue, and voila! Crash's leg was fixed. The biggest problem, however, was Coco. Sure, putting her body back together and adding a little glue to the torso was going to be a walk in the park, but that wouldn't help her face. She was seriously suffering from paint issues. This is mainly due to quality control overlooking the shoddy work back when the figure was released. The most striking error on this figure was that the ears were never painted orange. They were just yellow. This is actually the Coco Bandicoot figure I used for my Christmas stop-motion animation.
Wow, Crash! Thank you for my new skirt!
I knew I wanted a new Coco figure, and eventually I found one on Vinted. It came all the way from France. But when it arrived, I quickly discovered that it too had been broken. The head had been snapped off and had been glued to the body of the figure. I opened up her body, found the neck joint, reattached it in the same way I did Crash's leg with a little metal pin, colour matched and painted the new neck, and then reassembled her. She looked good as new, so that was it. I finally had the perfect Moto set. The first thing I did was show my best friend Slade. Slade and I go way back, and he voices several characters in my animations.
We don't have much time!
He's always been there for me, and he was so chuffed for me. And as a Rarest Crash Bandicoot collector himself, he'd always wanted a Moto set too. We've been obsessing over Crash toys for years, so once I'd completed my full lineup of Rarest figures, I wanted to complete his lineup too. I wasn't sure how I'd go about this because these figures are expensive and neither of us had much money. It seemed like we'd be hoping for a miracle. But I still had Ugly Coco hanging around. I spoke to Slade and some other friends about Ugly Coco, and they suggested that I fix her up. So I did. I slowly began colour matching her paint and gently painted over her features. This included painting the orange on her ears, and that alone made a huge improvement. I also painted over the yellow overspray on her muzzle. I corrected the shape and overspray on her eyes, and she also had these weird black lines going across her face, so I covered those up too. Eventually, she started looking alright. But unfortunately, the poor quality of the previous paint couldn't be totally covered, so the texture is a bit off, but overall she looks much better than she did before. I promised my buddy Slade that if I ever found a loose Moto Crash, I would give him my new beautiful Coco to go with it. But like I say, it was like waiting for a miracle. Finding that set loose is very difficult, but finding them loose and on their own, I didn't have a chance in hell. But one day, when I was searching for Crash Bandicoot figures, I stumbled across this listing. It had a couple of 90s figures, but I couldn't see Crash. I skipped past it a few times and assumed it was some kind of mistake. but then out of curiosity I opened it up, and that's when I saw it! Moto Crash! And for such a cheap price I couldn't say no, so I snapped it up, even though the figure was clearly damaged. He was missing his forearms. See, this is an issue because it's not like I can just go on eBay and pick out some new arms, so I'll have to make some. Or harvest some. For those who may be unaware, although the Moto Crash Bandicoot design came first, the figure's mold was actually repurposed to create the high-flying Crash Bandicoot figure for Series 2 as well. However, the high-flying Crash Bandicoot figure is brown, not black. But I could easily fix that with an airbrush. I had also recently received a disfigured high-flying Crash in a donation to the channel, so I could repurpose his arms. This can be done easily because, although unintentional on Rarest's side, the simple elbow joints on the figure can be pulled apart very easily, much like a Lego, and thus I could simply swap the forearms over. But there was one major setback. The Moto figure's joints were snapped off. I could try to rebuild these joints, though they'd probably be weak and probably not look as good, or I could harvest the entire arm. So that's what I decided to do. The figure's bodies are actually made in a solid lump. They aren't hollow, so they can't be opened up like Coco can. In order to remove the arms from the figures, they'll have to be boiled. This actually softens up the figure body, not the arms, as I soon came to realise. Once it's hot enough, the arms can be gently popped out. For some reason the first video froze, so you can't see me remove the arms, but on the second video you can, and next you'll see me do it in real time so that you can hear the sound of the figure as well. And as you can see, they'll work perfectly. Crash's legs were also very warped, so to fix those I dipped him back into the boiling water, then flattened his feet and allowed him to sit for a little bit before dipping him into ice cold water to lock the plastic in place. When they're in this form, you can clearly see how they're exactly the same figure, just with different paint jobs. Oh, but remember the one on the right is deformed due to a quality control issue, so his ears are all over the place. Anyway, now to prep the arms for painting. I wanted to save as much of the original paint as possible, so I covered the fingers and thumb in masking tape so that they wouldn't get covered in paint. Then, before airbrushing the arms, I actually touched up the black paint on the Moto figure himself. He had lots of scratches and paint damage, but it wasn't hard to fix. I would do even more of that later on. But once that was done, I was on to airbrushing. I always choose the best time to airbrush, in the dead of night, with hardly any light at all. It's not ideal, but you know, I work late, so this is what I have to deal with. I paint on my veranda, and luckily my room provided enough light for me to see what I was doing. I was going to sand and prime the arms so that the paint would adhere better, but this would actually damage the really fine textured detailing going on the figure, so I decided to spray directly onto the raw figure, which, you know, I usually wouldn't recommend because the paint can come off and you have to be really careful with it, but luckily the textured nature of this figure's sculpt meant that that was not a problem. After several coats of both black paint and a semi-gloss coat, the arms looked like this. Once the tape was removed, I could see I'd done a pretty good job. I did have to fill some of the area around the figures with a brush by hand, but other than that, it looked perfect. The silver studs on his gloves were then painted in with a chrome paint pen. Although it's quite a simple process, I actually surprised myself with how accurate I'd got these arms to look. I then had the nerve-wracking task of installing the arms into the figure. At first I thought I needed to heat up the arms, but I soon realised this wouldn't work and the arms wouldn't go soft. It was actually the body that I needed to heat up. Unfortunately, my camera died when I just fitted the arms into the body, which is a shame. It was actually quite the struggle, and it was a lot harder getting them in than it was getting them out. In the struggle, I had damaged some of the paintwork, so I had to repaint that a little bit by hand. I also used that opportunity to touch up some more of the black paint on his body. Not only the black paint, but his ears and ankle were also damaged, so I needed to repaint those. It took a lot of different attempts to colour match the red, but I got there in the end. Then all I needed to do was give him a top coat. I couldn't believe how fresh and new this figure looks now, but you'll have to wait until the end of the video to see the completed figure. So technically that's 4 Moto Crash Bandicoot figures I've restored now, 2 Cocos and 2 Crashes. Seeing as the 2 I mended for my own collection look the most original, let's compare those to the 2 I totally overhauled for Slade. As you can see, Crash looks fantastic with his new arms, the colours match perfectly, and he honestly looks like a brand new figure. It's very hard to tell the difference between the original Moto Crash's arms and the restored arms. The arm on the left is an original and the arm on the right is a restored one. It's a tiny bit glossier, but other than that it looks perfect. And here he is with Coco. They both look fresh out of the box. Coco is leaning on him because, well, this Coco figure, mint condition or not, never stands up. Her legs are just too thin. The last thing to do was find the accessories for them. The Moto set comes with 4 accessories, an action base, a rubbery Aku Aku mask, a clear gem, and Crash's sunglasses. Luckily all of these, bar the sunglasses, can be taken from an old high-flying Crash toy. To complete the set entirely, I need another pair of Crash's iconic glasses, but finding those for sale on their own is like finding a needle in a haystack. A very, very big haystack, and a very tiny needle.
Such a big head! Such a tiny brain!
So unfortunately, Slade's Moto Crash will just have to go without. Let's look at Coco then. The Coco on the left is what we'll call the original, even though I restored her too. I think it's very hard to tell the difference. You may notice that some of the paint colours are slightly different, however this is actually true of all Rarest figures. Each batch seemingly has slightly different colours and finishes. See how Coco's inner ears are different colours on the 2 figures? Nothing to do with me. I didn't paint those at all. I think both figures look very good, though the Coco on the right will unfortunately never look as good as a figure that passed a quality control inspection. I am, however, quite surprised with how well I managed to colour match Coco's ears considering I'm still very new at this. Overall, this project took quite a few months to complete, what with tracking down the new Coco, the Moto Crash figure, the high-flying Crash figure, and then restoring them all on and off. It's a shame I couldn't find the sunglasses for Slade, but if I do, I'll be sure to make an update, so stay subscribed. Despite the lack of sunglasses, Slade was over the moon with the figures and has displayed them with the rest of his Crash Bandicoot collection. It brings me so much joy to know that we have both finally finished our collections after our lifelong obsession. It's all come full circle. Well, here they are in all their glory. And let this be a lesson to everyone. If you're looking for a super rare toy, don't skip past the damaged and broken toys, because you can always fix them up and make them look brand new. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching this video. Also, please consider liking the video, subscribing to my channel, joining our Discord, and following me on Instagram and Twitter for even more rare Crash Bandicoot merchandise.
Hit subscribe! And don't forget to press the bell icon, you miserable bandicoots!